history of St. James's Way dates to the beginning of the 9th century with the discovery of St. James's tomb at Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain. The Way of St. James, commonly known as the Camino or El Camino de Santiago, is a large network of pilgrim routes stretching across Europe to the shrine of the Apostle St. James in the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela. Every year, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims of all faiths, ages and backgrounds walk to the cathedral in Santiago, which is the resting place of St. James the Apostle. Walking pilgrims take many routes, following in the footsteps of pilgrims of the Middle Ages. St. James's Gate on James's Street has been a traditional embarking point for pilgrims commencing their pilgrimages from Dublin since the 13th century. Pilgrims would have assembled here before walking through the city of Dublin and setting sail to Santiago de Compostela. Traditionally, St. James's Gate would have been the location of one of the outer gates of the walled city of Dublin. Merchants and farmers would have had to pass through it to enter the city of Dublin. Demolished in 1734, the front gate of the Guinness Brewery, founded in 1759 by Arthur Guinness, as we know it today, stands very close to what would have been the site of the old medieval gate of St. James. And standing here allows us to imagine the starting point of the ancient medieval pilgrim journey from Dublin. The links between this ancient part of Dublin and St. James span more than 800 years, and there's plenty of evidence of the Camino within this short distance. Reflecting on the popularity of the cult of St. James and the pilgrimage, there are a number of churches of medieval foundation within Ireland dedicated to St. James, including those on St. James's Street. Pilgrims across Europe often began their journey by visiting churches dedicated to St. James. And it's very likely that early Irish pilgrims assembled here at St. James's Church in the Liberties to confess their sins, receive Holy Communion and be blessed. The first church of St. James's built in the Liberties dates back to 1196. The current 19th century building on this site is the former Church of Ireland Parish Church of St. James, which was closed in 1963. The remains of the church and graveyard were purchased by Pierce and Deirdre Lyons in 2013, and following the meticulous renovation, including of the roof and spire, the Pierce Lyons Distillery and Visitor Centre was recently opened to the public. Pierce Lyons Distillery honours their connection to St. James and the Camino de Santiago with a beautiful stained glass window above the gallery, depicting Santiago de Compostela. The illustrations depict a courageous pilgrim on his way to Santiago, a harp, wheat, and finally the scallop shell. The graveyard behind the distillery is one of the oldest and largest of the inner city graveyards, and it's estimated that over 100,000 people were buried here between the 12th and 20th century. Excavations by the St. James Graveyard Project in the 1980s found some medieval coins and brooches as well as ornaments associated with the pilgrimage to Compostela. The most notable person buried in the graveyard was Sir Toby Butler, who was Secretary General under King James II and advocate of the Catholic case of the penal laws. In the 12th century, the Military Order of Santiago de Compostela was established to protect pilgrims en route to the shrine. Sir Toby Butler was made a knight in the Order of Santiago in 1689 for his loyalty to the Catholic King James II. His is the most imposing monument in the graveyard. Across the road from the church, in the middle of the road, is the fountain, an obelisk with 4 sundials with a drinking fountain, built in 1790 by the Duke of Rutland, the Lord Lieutenant. This fountain was said to be located on the former site of a holy well dedicated to St. James. This site was the focus of a medieval fair, the Fair of St. James, an annual summer festival of celebration, music, song, eating and drinking, taking place on St. James's feast day, the 25th of July. This fair, which lasted 6 days, attracted merchants from as far afield as England, France and Flanders. St. James's Catholic Church was built in 1852 on the other side of St. James's Street to its former Church of Ireland counterpart and continues its parochial role today. St. James's Church keeps its links to St. James's Way alive through the work of the Camino Society of Ireland, which has been based here since 2015. The Camino Society of Ireland provide information on the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. We meet Turlough O'Donnell, former chairman of the Camino Society of Ireland, and Pat Gibbs, who leads the volunteers in the Camino Information Centre.
The Camino Society of Ireland was established in 1992 by returned pilgrims who wanted to give something back to the Camino. We're standing now in the Camino Information Centre in St. James's Church. The purpose of this is to give information to pilgrims who are walking the Camino. We provide a passport to people who are walking the Camino. That's the credencial that shows that you're a bona fide pilgrim and allows you to get a certificate from the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. They examine your passport to see that it has been stamped right away across the Camino. The first stamp is often given here, so it's a remarkable thing to feel that we're linked with Santiago through the passport. This centre is run by volunteers under the leadership of Patt Gibbs. Volunteers in the Camino Centre really want to give something back to the Camino. That's why I think they volunteer, and they want to stay connected to the Camino because this is a little part of the Camino in Dublin. The true significance of it is that we're making an old connection that had foundered, that had disappeared between Santiago and this part of Dublin, in the heart of Dublin.
Looking at John Speed's map of Dublin from 1610, one can trace the route medieval pilgrims might have followed from St James's Gate to the port, which wasn't too far from where Trinity College is today. The spine of the city stretched west-east from St James's Gate to Thomas Street, High Street, Castle Street to Damas Gate. A person walking this route today will encounter physical legacies of this past, some of which still welcome pilgrims making their journey to Camino de Santiago. The parish church St Catherine's was built in the 13th century atop the site of an earlier church of St Thomas. The church was rebuilt in its present form in the 18th century. St Catherine's Church is famously known today as the site of revolutionary Robert Emmet's execution in 1803. A 17th century observer, John Smith, attests that the cemetery of the church was used by the Abbey of St Thomas as a burial site for strangers not of the parish, which would suggest a place of burial for pilgrims who perished on their journey. Two separate burials displaying the scallop shell motif had been uncovered recently, supporting this idea, as that would suggest they were pilgrims passing through the city. On this route, we can also visit St Audun's Church, a medieval parish church which is located in the heart of the old medieval city of Dublin. It is still an active parish church, and services are held here as they have been for 800 years. Dublin, as a point of departure for pilgrims travelling to Santiago or on the return, had a great appeal aside from the hostels attached to its religious houses. Christchurch Cathedral, with its many relics, would have drawn both pilgrims and travellers as they waited to sail. Christchurch, amongst Dublin's oldest buildings, would have been a firm marker for pilgrims on their way. The scallop shell is the most well-known symbol associated with the Camino de Santiago to commemorate the pilgrimage. According to tradition, when the remains of St James were originally unearthed, it was said to be covered in scallop shells. The scallop shell sign is reimagined on hundreds of milestones in yellow colour on a blue background along the different Camino routes. Medieval pilgrims would collect scallop shells, which were plentiful in Santiago, as proof of completion of their journey. And as noted, these were often buried with pilgrims when they died. Curiously, the scallop or other shell-like motifs have been replicated along this route in ways that seem to commemorate the pilgrimage. A 12th century baptismal font in the medieval St Audun's Anglican parish church contains a scallop shell on each side of its font. And in later references, one can see the scallop shell motif on the fountain at St James's Street, the 19th century street fountain on Lord Edward Street, and if you look closely at the front of St Audwin's Roman Catholic parish church on High Street, which dates to the 19th century, you can see that the decorative holy water fonts on either side of the doors are actually giant clam shells. Like any major waypoint on a pilgrimage trail, there was a demand for infrastructure to cater to the need of pilgrims, both in hospitality and religious houses. Henry de Lundres, Archbishop of Dublin, sought to develop a pilgrim hostel in Dublin to cater for both pilgrims and the poor. The Allen Register, a 16th century compilation of medieval sources, reports the intention of a hostel for pilgrims who intended to travel to the shrine of St James at Santiago de Compostela. We meet Dr. Susan Hood, librarian and archivist of the Representative Church Body Library, which is the reference library for the Church of Ireland and its repository for records.
Among the many collections that are here are the diocesan records from all over Ireland, including Dublin and Glendalough. And one of the Dublin items is this very rare, beautiful, illuminated manuscript of Archbishop Allen, who was Archbishop of Dublin at the Reformation, 1530 to 1534, just 4 years. It's a transcript that Archbishop Allen made when he comes to Ireland. He's appointed by Cardinal Wolsey, and he's put in because he's a very able churchman, an administrator and reformer. As you know, he was only in Ireland and Archbishop for 4 years because he's murdered at the height of a rebellion in the context of really difficult political times. This register is basically transcripts of medieval documents that he inherited as Archbishop. So he's employing his clerks to copy details of the deeds and leases and conveyances and all kinds of documents to make sense of the extent of this diocese of Dublin and Glendalough that he has inherited. We're very lucky that this document has survived the test of time. When Alan was taken captive, allegedly by Silken Thomas or his men, initially put into prison and then killed, if the register had been in his possession, it might have been disposed of. But it wasn't. It was safely in the Archbishop's house. So one of the documents that he employed his clerks to transcribe is a copy of a 13th century, dating from the 1200s, a deed from Pope Innocent to his predecessor, Henry de Londres, who was Archbishop of Dublin in the 13th century. And basically the Pope is setting a condition that he will unite the Archbishopric of Dublin with the Bishopric of Glendalough, giving the Archbishop custody of all of the lands and related pastoral responsibilities for Glendalough, on condition that he creates hospitality for the poor, for people seeking refuge. So it's a very, very nice idea, kind of pan-European context of outreach, linking it to the St. James de Compostela on the continent, that this hostel or hospital was to be created in return for the unification of the two dioceses. So we can actually return the page. We can see the transcript of this particular document. So we have Dublin and Glendalough right in the centre of this deed, the transcript of which begins here. And in some annotated notes at the bottom, there's detailed description then of where the hostel should be, down what is now on what we know as the quays or below Pier Street, very close to the sea. And that's accounted for here, and even to the extent of the number of people who were to, the clergy who were to oversee this hostel and what they were to wear and their responsibilities and so forth.
This hostel at St. James would have been near the site of the present-day Pier Street Garda Station. The spot chosen is an interesting one, near the seashore, as it was close to a Viking-era longstone sitting on a floodplain known as the Stein, itself on the Liffey south bank. This natural harbour would represent a departure point for pilgrims. The Viking longstone was constructed by the Vikings in 837 AD to signify their possession of the surrounding lands. A replica of the longstone was erected in 1986. This 11-foot granite sculpture has the head of Ivor, the first Norse king of Dublin. While Archbishop Allen's register shows funding was designated for a pilgrim hostel, we can find no archaeological or cartographical evidence that the hostel was constructed. However, the needs of pilgrims were met by 11 other pilgrim hostels in Dublin. As an example, the Augustinian Priory of All Saints, founded in 1166, was just meters away from the shore, and it provided accommodations for visitors, pilgrims amongst them. Religious houses were generally expected to provide such services. Walking the 3-kilometre journey from St. James's Gate through the medieval city of Dublin to the area in which pilgrims would have embarked allows us to follow in the footsteps of those medieval pilgrims today. The long and arduous journey by sea would have taken medieval pilgrims about 4 days, followed by a short trek to Santiago from A Coruña. Arriving at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, one can imagine the sense of wonder and awe medieval pilgrims would have felt arriving at one of Europe's most sacred places and one of the most spectacular shrines in the Christian world. Many elements would be added to the original building over the centuries, but Santiago de Compostela Cathedral remains a stunning Romanesque cathedral in essence. Early Irish pilgrims travelling to Santiago de Compostela did so in pursuit of some personal goal, driven by religious conviction, a search for a cure, atonement for their sins, or for mere wanderlust. The Camino has seen a tremendous revival in modern times. Today, 12 centuries later, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims travel along the Camino for many different reasons, with more than 5,000 Irish people taking part in the Camino annually in recent years.
The idea of exercise, walking, doing it for yourself, being free under the skies, doing something which has been traditionally done for years, over the years, all of these are attractive, I think, to modern day pilgrims. But there's a quest, really. It's a quest, it's a search. It's a search for meaning, I think.
There's all kinds of motivations. There are people who are coming in because they need a break from whatever problems they have. People coming in who want to figure out what's going on in their own lives. There are people coming in because it's a religious thing, because it's a spiritual thing. There are people coming in because they like a challenge. All kinds of reasons. One of our members walked the Camino in 1982, and that year 150 people walked. In recent years it's gotten up to about 350,000. So something has happened. People have some kind of a need, and they found that the Camino was a way of dealing with that need. It could be that the world has gotten more complicated, and it's not very complicated when you're on the Camino. There's a certain amount of it that is fashionable. You know, people who walk long distances just add it to their list. But the bulk are people who are doing it for personal reasons, and an awful lot of them come back a lot better than they were when they started out.
The Cathedral Santiago has agreed to grant a pilgrim certificate at Compostela to pilgrims who complete the 75-kilometre Camino route from A Coruña to Santiago, as long as they have already completed a certified 25-kilometre pilgrimage in their country of origin. This provides Irish pilgrims with a great opportunity to do part of the Camino at home, and there are a number of suggested routes in Ireland on the Camino Society of Ireland website. Pilgrims walking the Camino de Dublin as part of their 25 kilometres can get their pilgrim passport stamped in many stops along the way, including in the Pierce Lines Distillery, the Camino Centre in St James's Church, the Guinness Storehouse and Christchurch Cathedral.